no lighting in my apartment. Like we have two overhead lights, and they're just not great. And if I go in front of the window, it's like the background isn't as cute as the little bookshelf wine crate thing, so we're stuck with that today. But happy to report that I am alive. If you're watching this video, you probably already know that because only my mom and my friends watch my videos. Um, but on the off chance you're not my mom or my friend, I am alive. I also got a new phone since my last video, so hopefully the camera's better, even though the lighting is awful, and I can't plug in my microphone because I didn't realize that this new phone doesn't have an audio jack. Okay, I felt for a second like my mouth was off, like there's like a delayed thing in the camera, but I don't think so. Okay. So after my last video, which I did on the Yellow Deli and the 12 Tribes cult, I decided, let me do a little Google search, see what other cults are operating or have operated in Massachusetts. And I came across one from Attleboro, Massachusetts, that is referred to as the body, as in, I believe, like the body of Jesus Christ type thing. And yeah, it originated in Attleboro. They eventually moved to Maine. It seems like they're disbanded now, so that's good. But today I'm going to tell you the story about the body cult. I think that's such a silly name for a cult. I mean, most cults don't have good names, but I think that one's kind of extra ridiculous. So before we get started, also like a general, I guess, trigger warning that, I'm talking about a cult, so the stuff that happens isn't really happy. And in fact, there will be a point where we discuss child neglect, where two parents starve their children, or their child, to the point where the child dies, except the child's actually a baby. So, and if I'm looking over here, it's because I got my notes. And also, my sources will be linked in the description box, because that's important. Basically, this cult started in, well, I guess the story of the cult originated, not as the cult itself didn't start in the 70s, but any good cult has an origin story from the 1970s. And this was no exception because it started when this guy named Roland Robideau. I don't know how you say it, and I didn't look up because I really don't care because you're a leader of a cult, so I feel like I don't owe you the respect of saying your last name correctly. Anyways, so apparently, well, his principal name was Joseph Roland Robideau, but he was mostly referred to as Roland. So I guess he went by his middle name. Anyways, he hears a message on the radio one day. He's like driving around. He's a salesman, driving around Attleboro, Massachusetts, and he hears like this advertisement for a church, okay? And so this advertisement comes from a guy named Herbert W. Armstrong, okay? And Armstrong comes on the radio and tells listeners, hey, come to my church. My church is the one true religion. Then all the other churches, this is the one. This is the one that you need to go to. This is the only religion. This is the one true one. Come here. And it's the only one where people actually practice what they preach. Because, lots of religions are known to not practice what they preach. So anyways, yeah, this guy on the radio is like, come here, come join my church. And pretty shortly after hearing this message, Robideau was pretty easily convinced to just leave the Catholic Church that he was a part of. So I guess it didn't take much convincing. I guess maybe he was already planning to leave. I don't know. He began attending Armstrong's church, which is known as the Worldwide Church of God, I believe. Yeah, okay, but right now it doesn't have an official name yet. And it's nobody really like joins a cult. Like you just kind of end up in one, and you'll see that progress as this guy like goes to this church, and then things escalate. He actually ends up leaving the church, and he's the one that starts the cult. Like I said, that's why I don't care about saying his last name correctly. pretty quickly he got really deep into this church. He became known as a quote loyalist, and which basically seems to me he believed anything and everything the church would tell him without question. And some are, gonna say there's some weird things about the church. Like it talked about like his daughters, like it was like her 10th birthday, and like they couldn't celebrate birthdays, but it wasn't like Jehovah's Witness where they don't just celebrate holidays. I don't know why it was like no birthdays. Anyways, so like I said, the 1970s was when he heard the message on the radio. It didn't say specifically what year in the 1970s, but by 1978, he left the Worldwide Church of God and started his own sect of the church, which is a pretty common thing to do. And he started this sect with a guy named Brian Weeks, who he eventually does have a falling out with, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And he called this church the Church of God of Mansfield, and then it later became the Church of God of Norton. So Norton and Mansfield are just two Massachusetts towns, so I'm guessing that's where he like moved to instead of Attleboro, because like they're close to Attleboro. So I'm guessing he actually moved the church there, or like his sect. So that's in 1978. Okay, he and Robideau and Brian Weeks make their own church sect, and it basically becomes filled with, because okay, Weeks was also part of the Worldwide Church of God in Attleboro with Robideau, and so people end up following both of them to this new sect, and it basically becomes a group of people that were like disgruntled church members, like people that were upset of the church in Attleboro that they were a part of. So it's like, I mean, yeah, it's exactly how it sounds like. It's the people that are, you know, fed up with their current church, and so like, let me follow these guys to this new church that's like a sect based off the one that I'm already in. I already know these guys. I trust these guys. We're already part of the same church. They feel the same thing where they want to get out of the church. So, you know, people follow them, and the people that follow them already feel strongly against the Worldwide Church of God. And from what I was reading, it seemed like Robideau sort of struggled leading this new church, which like I can understand how that would be hard. And it was a very small sect, to the point where it was kind of described in some places as like being a Bible study rather than like an official church that, like, you know, gets no taxes from the government. I mean, I don't know if they got taxes or not, but it seemed more like a Bible study type thing, and basically nobody knew what they were doing. They were trying to interpret the Bible, like the one that's, you know, not in English. I mentioned Arabic. I thought it was in Latin. I don't know. Either way, they could not read what they were trying to read. And so it just basically became a grieving session, or like a vent session about the Worldwide Church of God, because like I said, all the members of this new church came from that old church. So they're like, let's vent about how much we hated that place we were a part of. And hating something can really bring people together. So I can sort of understand how this slowly or quickly turned into a cult. Like I said, so 1978 is when he created the own church, and then 1986, so 8 years later, Robideau bought a 2-story house, and he moved the Bible study / mini church sect to this house. Okay, I cannot find where they were practicing before. To be honest, I don't know if it was like an actual building or if it was like his old house or what, because there really isn't like too much information out there. I mean, there's like definitely like, okay, there's a decent amount of information, but it's not like the 12 Tribes Code where I could find like a lot of reputable sources. Like these I found in a number of sources, but I don't know how trustworthy they are. So anyways, Bible study / church moves into his house. And then things get worse because we have all of these disgruntled ex-church members in their new church. And then among these disgruntled ex-members, then there's other members. They end up eventually like splitting in half, because like, okay, then one side becomes upset with the other side because there's just like this small group now in like close-knit quarters in this like little house, spending all the time with each other. And they basically removed themselves from the quote Bible study group / church, and they wanted to create a commune. Step number 1 to a cult. Maybe not step number 1, but it's up there. Because they wanted like-minded people who wanted just oh my god, what is the opposite of secular? They wanted people who rejected secular laws and rules and stuff and secular society. They wanted everything religion-based. So the Bible study / mini church sect broke up, okay? And then the extremists moved into the duplex. And I'm like, is the duplex a 2-story house? I don't know. The whole origin of the cult isn't super clear. So other than the fact that these two guys, Robidoux and Weeks, leave a church, start a new one. And then I don't know, just somewhere along the way, basically, it goes wrong, okay? And a group, part of that new group, decides to branch off, okay? So now the people that branched off and wanted to reject secular laws and everything, they live in a home together, and what's very common for people that are religious is to homeschool their children. So, because they don't agree with the stuff taught in secular schools, so this group, homeschools their children, and they also abuse their children, which we'll talk about later. And a big thing, a very big thing of this cult, is that they reject modern medicine in every single way. So basically, yeah, they cut themselves off from society, and they all moved in together, and they're let's homeschool our kids and not do anything that's outside of this house. And what's also true of many cults, I feel all cults, they're there's the prophecy, okay? And so their ideologies, again, prophecies, and they saw themselves as, this is a quote from Boston.com that I'm reading, a bastion, don't know if I'm saying that right, of biblical faith in an evil world. So they were above, they were the example of religion, earlier before, the one true religion, that Armstrong guy was my church is the one true religion. And then Robidoux and Weeks left his church and was actually, this one. This is the one. We're the ones. We're the example of God and religion, and nobody else is. And so around the time when that, just like I said, Robidoux and Weeks, they made their own church sect. And then when that smaller sect broke off into 2 even smaller sects, that's when Robidoux and Weeks' relationship also broke off. So Weeks was not in the extra extremist that Robidoux was in, and he ended up leaving. And he came back to visit in the mid-80s. And remember, he started the sect in, 1978. So it really hadn't been that long since the church started, and I don't know what year Weeks actually left this new church, but by the mid-80s, so either way, not that long, he came back to visit his friend, because Robidoux and Weeks were friends, and he basically said that his friend was a quote, shell of his former self. And then Robidoux basically shamed Weeks for being part of an organized church, because Robidoux believed all churches were hypocritical and authoritarian, and Weeks is this seems ironic, because, and then this is another quote I have, but he failed to see that he was the authority of this group, Weeks said. He became the thing he hated. All the things that he was originally disgruntled with, he became. The sole authority not being questioned. He believed that he had the truth. Robidoux grew to have absolute power over his family, said Michelle's husband, Dennis Mingo, who would later split from the group. We'll discuss who Michelle is later. One year, Robidoux read a book about high-protein diets and fed the family only meat. The next year, he commanded a vegetarian diet. The next, it was organic food. So yeah, basically, he becomes the thing that he says he is so against, and we see that a lot. So I said a minute ago that a major part of this cult was that they rejected modern medicine, because again, they rejected rejected anything that wasn't secular. And it mainly came from this book by a woman named Carol Balizet, who was a nurse turned extremist, which was interesting. Basically, she didn't believe in medicine, like I said, and believed that humans basically should not interfere with what God wants by involving, quote, input, assistance, or backup from the medical system. And then an interesting word choice is she said, our response to God must be based on obedience, not outcome. So the obedience to me is the interesting word choice, because it's like that no question authoritarianism, which is what Robidoux says he's against. I mean, I guess if it's God, the authoritarianism is right, but Robidoux is the authority in this case, which he, at this point, does not fully grasp, or he does grasp it and just doesn't care. Also, she didn't believe, Carol Balizet, this book that Robidoux read from her, beyond her not believing medicine, she again basically didn't believe of any of these like non-secular things like government, banking, school, entertainment, and commerce. That was like the list of things that she detailed in her book that she rejected the ideas of. I'm like, you can't these aren't ideas you can reject, like they're actual things. But it seems like this book that she wrote was sort of like their guidebook or handbook as to what they should be believing. Also, I would like to once again point out, like I did in my last video, and I seem to want to do all the time, is that, you know, we're going back to like entertainment. Entertainment can mean media, okay? And media, people always associate with journalism and the news and stuff like that. People forget that freedom of the press is in the First Amendment. It's not just freedom of speech. Like, there's several different things in there. All I'm saying is, it's not, it's just not, it's not good. So anyways, so that's where we're at with the cults right now. So the cult called The Body, Joseph Roland Robidoux, has split off from two different churches. First, the one that was the Worldwide Church of God, and the one he opened with Brian Weeks, and now has his own, quote, church, which is now the cult, where he is the sole authority and everybody listens and does what he says. And he has a son. His son is named Jacques Robidoux, and he is eventually, of course, named the elder of the cult, you know, who doesn't love nepotism. And he seems to be even worse than his dad. Also, beyond Jacques wasn't the only kid that Joseph Roland Robidoux had. He had Jacques and then a daughter named Michelle, okay? And Michelle Mingo, that's her married name, Mingo, becomes important later, so remember that name, okay? So Jacques was named the elder of this group because he has a strong faith. And like I said, he ends up being even more extreme than his father. And his father is still like alive at this point. But I guess it's just like, you know, time to pass the torch. He's ready to, you know, hand the reins over to his son. And yeah, he changed even more rules. And I'm not ending this video now, but at the end of this video, I'm going to give you a list of some of the rules that I found that are wild. So anyways, Jacques is now like the head honcho of The Body. And he, one night, is like, you know what? I just got this vision from God, and he told me that I need to take us all to Maine because that is the promised land. And it's the middle of the night. And everybody gets up. And they literally follow him from Attleboro, Massachusetts, which, if you don't know, that's not in the northern part of Massachusetts. That's down south. That's near Rhode Island. Follow him all the way up to Maine. Okay, so that's like several hours in the middle of the night because he's like, actually, God came to me and we're not supposed to be here. We are supposed to be in Maine because Maine is the promised land. Which, okay, I'm sorry. Why would Maine be a promised land? That's silly. And so, yeah, they moved several states away because their leader told them to, and they did it without question. And now, as they are there, things continue to get worse because now they're even further away from their family and they are urged to not. They're They basically tell their families that are outside of this cult not to contact them, which beyond controlling the narrative of like not allowing like media and other stuff, this is also a big thing with cults is they cut you off from your family because or your friends that are on the outside because those people on the outside can see what you're not seeing when you're inside the cult and they're seeing the fact that you're in a cult. But if they take away those people, then you have no one to like get you out and tell you, hey, you're in a cult, because the only people you're with are in the cult with you and don't realize you're in a cult. Okay, so recap. 1970s, Joseph Roland Robidoux hears a radio message that tells him to join this church. He joins the church pretty quickly. He also leaves the church pretty quickly by the 1980s, and he starts a new church with Brian Weeks. Shortly after starting the new church with Brian Weeks, he and Weeks separate, and Robidoux starts his own church, which quickly turns into a cult because he becomes the sole voice of authority. And then his son, Jacques, becomes the main authority. Joseph is still alive, but, you know, he's just older, I guess, and Jacques is old enough to take control and be the sole authority. And Jacques takes all of the cult members to Maine. And now they're completely cut off from their outside family members, which most of the people in the cult were like family already and related to begin with. So I think it's more like those like extended or like family friends type thing, where it's like not your blood family. Either way, so quickly within like 10-15 years, I think, I can't do the math, it goes from radio message, one church, leave church, starts new church, church splits, creates own church, becomes sole authority of church, hands sole authority to son, son takes everybody to Maine and isolates everybody even more. Okay, so that's where we are. And now is the part where I tell you the very sad, like, sort of main story of this cult, which fortunately or unfortunately becomes their downfall, because unfortunately because it comes literally at the hands of a baby's life. Unfortunately because it means they finally were caught and they faced consequences. Well, debatable whether or not they faced the consequences they deserved, but we'll get into that. So like I said, Michelle Mingo, Jacques Robidoux's sister. Remember, Jacques is the leader now. He's the new head honcho, okay? And this is when she comes back. It's now March 1999, so we're still in the 1900s. Like, we haven't even hit, like, the new millennium yet, okay? And she's struggling with her marriage. And, okay, so this part is my own speculation, because I think it's a combination of just, like, she has a vision, okay? And I think the visions that often happen in cults are a result of, like, okay, so a thing that they do a lot to really brainwash you is they deprive you of resources that are necessary to basically think clearly. Like, they'll deprive you of food. Think about earlier how Joseph Robidoux had like all different diets every year. He was like changing what they eat, and like I feel like that could like do a lot for your body, randomly going from like a complete carnivore diet then actually, you know what, next day vegetarian. Like, that can't be, it can't be good going jumping around like that. So yeah, they often control what you eat. Usually they make it so you're basically starving yourself, and so you can't think straight. Because think about how you get when you're like hungry, right? Like, you can't think straight, you get hangry, you're irrational, you're not thinking straight. And then also they often, for, you see those like retreats, like those cult like retreats, and they don't give you enough time to get a good night's sleep, which they fill with like activities all the time. And think about the fact that they all moved to Maine in the middle of the night, which tells me like they aren't necessarily getting good night's sleep every night. So I think just like a combination of that, and then you're like just being washed by the fact that you're in a cult and things can like move very quickly. Anyways, so now Michelle is also having visions. Because remember, her brother, oh, Jacques had the vision that they needed to move to Maine because it's the promised land. Well, now Michelle, his sister, is having a vision. And in this vision, it basically says that her nephew, Samuel, okay, right now Samuel is several months old and he's eating solid foods at this point, which I don't know what time babies start eating solid foods, but apparently by this point he is eating them regularly. And in this vision, apparently God comes to Michelle and is like, no more solid foods for Samuel. He actually should be fed breast milk only. And to nobody's surprise, Jacques Robidoux, so Samuel's dad, and Karen Robidoux, who is Jacques' wife and Samuel's mother, took the word of Michelle, who, again, Jacques' sister, Samuel's aunt, and they took it as truth, and they slowly, not slowly, they just stopped. They stopped feeding Samuel, and he only gets breast milk, and that's just not enough. And they can see as he slowly is becoming more malnourished and emaciated. And of course, they're told, or specifically Karen, it seems, is told that this is God testing her faith and that she needs to trust God because this is what he told Michelle. He told Michelle that she needs to do this. And God, yeah, basically God is testing her right now. And if she feeds Samuel solid food, then she fails that test. So she has to show her loyalty to God, apparently, by starving her poor little baby. And supposedly, and I don't know how, okay, so this is one of the things where there's conflicting information, because one article says that this happened without the knowledge of like other members of the group beyond like, you know, Karen, Jacques, and Michelle. And then another said that at one point Karen Robidoux, so Samuel's mother, had talked to other members of the group and said that like God actually told me that I need to start feeding Samuel solid foods again. And Jacques and Roland Robidoux, so the baby's father and grandfather, were like, no, this is like just God testing you again. Like you can't feed him. You can only give him breast milk. Like this is part of the test. And she needs to continue to only feed him breast milk to prove she is a true believer. So anyways, this is very sad. So yeah, basically she and Jacques starve their baby because they believe that God does not want Samuel to have solid food. Just milk was not enough for him. So at 11 months old, Samuel passed after 51 days of no solid food. That's just under 2 months of being literally starved to death. Oh, and like I said, he's 11 months old, and what's extra sad, it's already sad to begin with, he passed 3 days before he would have turned 1. So, like, it was almost his birthday. And, you know, first birthdays are supposed to be happy. And Samuel, shockingly, did not get a proper burial or a proper goodbye. Instead, he was taken in the middle of the night to a park in Maine where they buried him and apparently another baby who was not named. Supposedly this baby was miscarried. And so, yeah, they bury them together in a park. But thankfully, they got caught because a former member came back to visit one day, apparently. And this doesn't seem like it's necessarily the cult where they the type of cult where they don't allow you to leave because like people have left. It just seems like, I mean, it's a cult, so like a lot of people don't realize what they're in really. But obviously, you know, some people did and some people got out. And this person got out and they came back to visit one day and they noticed that Samuel was gone. And fortunately, they like immediately notified the authorities, and the authorities came and they were like asking Jacques Robidoux about his son. Jacques was like not helping them find his son at all. And like I said, thankfully the authorities are actually investigating this. Unlike when I did my last video and I talked about the 12 tribes cult and like the police that came there for like 13 minutes and were like, everything's fine, everything's fine, everybody's fine. So they noticed that Jacques was like not giving them any answers as to where Samuel was, and he really had like no concern about his son. And so they're like, this is suspicious. This is weird. And they began to investigate the cult, and it seemed like a lot of the people in the cult kept diaries, because that's actually how like people found out their name is the Body, because they refer to themselves as the Body in these diaries. And the diaries had details the neglect that baby Samuel had faced and the death that had occurred from neglect. So after the authorities, you know, went through that evidence, there were 14 kids in the cult, and they took them away into the custody of authorities now. Authorities, it didn't really say like if it was like specifically like, it's probably not local police with this stuff, maybe state. I don't think it was like at FBI level, or like maybe it was like social workers, I don't know, but like somebody that's allowed to, you know, take the kids away into a safe custody. And beyond the there's actually 13 kids that got taken into the custody of authorities, because they also took in a pregnant woman for the safety of her unborn child. So they considered that in the group of children to take away. And this was definitely, all 13 children apparently were grandkids to Joseph Roland Robidoux. So like I said, it seemed like they were all related, and so I think the people that were outside of the cult may have been like more like a family friends type of thing. But unfortunately, it was too late for Samuel Robidoux, who suffered when his parents starved him. There was also a baby named Jeremiah Robidoux who had passed. And then there was the unnamed baby that was buried with Samuel. And it seems like all of the adults, so the 13 kids plus the pregnant woman, were the 13 kids that are remaining in the cult anyways, plus the pregnant woman, were taken into custody. And then the adults, it seems, were arrested or questioned. I think most of them were arrested. And only one of them truly went to jail. Who was Jacques Robidoux, so the father of baby Samuel. And for that, he was charged with first-degree murder for obvious reasons, and he was sentenced to life in prison. And he is, last I checked, he is at the Bridgewater Correctional Facility, which is a state prison. And due to what I like to refer to as sweet prison justice, he did get beat up quite a bit, because, you know, prisoners, they can be awful, but a lot of them do not tolerate people that hurt children and babies. And so a lot of them beat him up and called him a baby killer. And like, I mean, yeah, he kind of was. So yeah, he got sentenced to life in prison and was not having a good life in prison. And for some reason, Karen Robidoux, who was the mother of baby Samuel, was found guilty of assault and battery and sentenced to time served. And she was put on trial for second-degree murder, but was found not guilty. Okay, and the prosecutor on this case, who was Paul F. Walsh, was like, how is he guilty? And she's like, not even guilty of second-degree murder, and he's like guilty of first-degree murder, gets sentenced to life in prison, and she just gets like time served and like a slap on the wrist, you know? And so a quote that I'm going to read from him is from the original Newsbreak article that I'll list below. And Walsh said, quote, "This much is certain. Samuel was systematically starved to death before his first birthday by his father and mother," his statement said. "There is a time to temper justice with mercy. In my view, this wasn't one of them. Individuals are responsible not only to God. Parents have legal responsibilities. Feeding your kids is one of them. People have to stop making excuses. Never before in 14 years as district attorney have I been this disturbed by a verdict." So, yeah. So, Jacques got in trouble. Karen, not too much, though. Michelle Mingo, so the sister-in-law and aunt to baby Samuel, who was the one that came up with the idea to starve him. She was sentenced to time served as well and was tried with accessory to murder. And Roland Robidoux, who just Joseph Roland Robidoux, the starter of this whole cult, the grandfather of all the children in the cult, the father of Jacques and Michelle, he wasn't charged with anything, and he's since passed away. So that's interesting. Okay, recap. So now we have this guy who's an ex-member, comes back, notice baby Samuel is gone. He notifies authorities. Authorities look into it, realize that baby Samuel's parents starved him to death. They take all the other kids in the cult into custody, and they arrest the adults. Okay, the dad gets formally charged with first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. The mom gets put on trial for second-degree murder, but gets formally charged with assault and battery and is sentenced to time served. Michelle, the aunt, is sentenced to time served and is charged with accessory to murder. Joseph Roland, the grandfather and founder of the cult, is charged with nothing, and it has since passed, okay? So that's the recap of where we are at, okay? So some sort of good news is that, like I think I said this earlier, is it seems that this cult has since been disbanded. I mean, probably partially because half of them got charged. Karen Robidoux has supposedly since then woken up to the fact that she was in a cult. A 2019 article from WNG.org, which I don't know what that is, also says that Jacques has also supposedly woken up to his wrongdoings and the fact that he was in a cult. And the WNG article has an interview with him, which is interesting. It will be linked below. And he basically talks about, so Karen sent him divorce letters like a year into him being in prison, and it seems like between that and him being called a baby killer by his fellow inmates really woke him up a little bit. And this is eventually when he realized, you know what, maybe God's plan actually wasn't for me to starve my baby to death. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe that's not what he wanted. Crazy, I know. He was like, maybe I actually did kill my son because I starved him to death when I knew I shouldn't have. And then also in the article, Jacques basically says that, like, or implies that this brainwashing and manipulation, which, by the way, he was kind of a part of. I know his dad founded the cult, but, like, he eventually also becomes, like, the leader. But basically implies that this happened so quickly that, like, if his sister had a vision the year earlier, because this vision happened in 1999. So if this vision happened in 1998, that, like, he would have laughed and be like, God didn't tell me to starve my kid. What are you talking about? So I don't know, like, things moved very quickly. So not, like, really necessarily a happy ending, because I'm sure the cult members who are alive still have, like, tons of trauma to deal with. And they lost several children. But it sort of seems like the leaders are like, okay, were they actually sorry, or are they sorry they got caught, you know? Sometimes you wonder. But either way, it seems that it doesn't exist anymore because the authorities actually looked into it and actually arrested adult for abusing children, although some of the charges were too light, but it's more than I've seen in some other cases, so I guess there's that. But now I'm going to finish with a list of some of the fun little rules that the cult had, so I'm just going to bring my laptop up here and read them directly off for you. So we already know about when Joseph Roland Robidoux did the extreme diets where he went from high protein diets and was like only meat, and then he was like vegetarian diet, and then he was like organic food only. But here are some other ones. There was one year Roland said, "Why are we singing the same songs these false churches sing?" Mingo recalls. I believe it's Michelle Mingo here speaking, so the daughter of Roland. Thus the family's most beloved hymns were banned. Eventually Michelle, who had been a music major in college before she dropped out, composed a new song for her group with lyrics taken from the Bible. "We just sing that song over and over again," Mingo said. So they would sing literally the same song over and over again, which sounds torturous. In February 1998, so this is a year before the baby Samuel incident that Michelle kind of starts. Michelle told the group that God considered eyeglasses forbidden medicine. Remember, they hate medicine. After that came others. No shorts, no cosmetics, no photo albums. So it seems like Michelle is also a big problem here beyond Jack. Like, the apple did not fall far from the tree in this family. In November 1998, again, 1998, it seems like it really all went down in the 90s. Jacques said God commanded them to throw away all books, so books were tossed. And then, in keeping with the whole no contact thing I talked about earlier, Robidoux, Jacques, also cut off contact with his 84-year-old mother, who lived next door because she dropped out of the group to get help for her cataracts. So basically, she sought out the help of Western medicine, so he cut off contact with her. That's just a couple of the fun little other mini rule things that happened in this cult known as the Body. It's kind of, yeah, this was a lot more confusing to me than like my video on the 12 tribes, just because like I felt like this, I found like a decent amount of sources, but like I said, I didn't necessarily find like sources where I was like, yes, this is like, I know for a fact this is trustworthy. Like, they seem trustworthy, but I don't know, because like the original like newspaper articles and stuff that were linked to are like too old, so they're not up anymore, and I didn't search the old internet archives. Let's give a final recap of what happened. Okay, Joseph Roland Robidoux hears a radio ad for a church, leaves the Catholic Church, joins this new church, leaves that church, starts his own church with his friend, leaves the church with his friend, starts a new church that basically turns into the cult. He has 2 children, which he had already had before he started the cult, I believe, Jacques and Michelle. And Joseph Roland Robidoux basically becomes the sole authority of this new church. And then Jacques and Michelle don't fall far from the tree, and also believe that they have visions from God and see the prophecy. And Jacques takes everybody to Maine because he's like, this is the promised land. And Michelle is like, actually, you need to starve your child / my nephew, because that's what God told me. And then finally, an ex-member who somehow got out at some point came back and was like, this child is gone. Let me talk to the authorities. The authorities investigate it. And then they arrested some of the adults, took the kids away. And some of the adults got formally charged. Jacques is life in prison. Karen and Michelle are wandering about out there, and Roland is dead. That's all I have for today. Yeah, I'm sorry this is not, well, obviously it's not a happy video. It's about cults. I'd say if you like this video to like it and subscribe, but I hope you don't like this video because it's not it's not about something good. So that's kind of concerning if you like it. And then hopefully it doesn't take me like 12 years to research my next video and film it.